Hello, and welcome to another episode of Conversations with Canisius. Today, I am joined by Dennis Dracup from the class of 1971. Dennis has had a varied career in executive positions and looking forward to sharing this conversation with our students and our alumni as we look to engage our Canisius community that goes beyond our Western New York zip codes. So Dennis, thank you so much for joining us, and congratulations on 50 years from graduation, your Golden Jubilee year.
Doesn't seem possible, Paul. It was just yesterday that I walked through those doors and walked out again 4 years later as a different person, that's for sure. I think I was much younger then, but that remains to be seen.
So, you talked about the journey of 4 years at Canisius. Why don't you share a little bit of that journey with our viewers? Talk about how you got to Canisius and then what you pursued following your time at the high school.
Sure. So the way I made it to Canisius is like most of the students at Canisius, I was a pretty smart kid in my grade school. And my parents wanted to make sure that I had an opportunity to continue to develop and to excel. And it was a struggle for them, honestly, to send me to Canisius. I was one of 6 kids. And my older brother didn't have the same academic interests, so he didn't go to the high school. One of my younger brothers did, but the balance of the family did not go to Catholic schools. So it was a struggle, but it was pretty clear early on that my parents had high expectations that I would use my skills and talents to the best of my ability. So that's what got me to the high school. And I'll talk a little bit later about some of the things that I learned there that I've kept with me and how it's influenced my time. But it certainly was one of the foundational experiences of my life that kept with me all these many years. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, so post Canisius, what about college, and then what in your adult life led you to the career that you pursued?
Well, after I graduated from the high school, I went on to Canisius College, as did many of my classmates. I started in pre-med, and I did pretty well as a student, but quite frankly, I just didn't like the curriculum and figured it out that I really didn't want to be a doctor after all. That left somewhat of a gap, right? And the gap was I didn't really know what I wanted to do. So I thought about it, and I became an English major, which seems strange, but in retrospect, it served me very, very well because it built upon the verbal and written communication skills that first were initiated at the high school. During that same time, I met and married my wife for 45 years, Chris, who was a Mount Mercy girl. And over time, we were able to have 4 kids together. So it was a very formative time in my life at the college as well. But as all good things must, I had to go out and get a job at one point, and I determined that business was probably the best route for me. I enrolled at the University of Buffalo, SUNY Buffalo, as an MBA student with a concentration in accounting. And I will tell you that being an English major and then going into an accounting major, extremely difficult, but thank goodness that I had the discipline instilled upon me in the high school so that I ultimately made that transition. And once I got the basic understandings down, it was actually a lot of fun, and I've enjoyed accounting ever since. Once I graduated from the MBA program, I was recruited into a company called More Business Forums, which was a very large company originally located in Niagara Falls. And I began my 17-year tenure there as an accounting trainee. And I mean, some of this relates to what I would encourage other people to think about as they go into their own careers. But early on, I was determined to work really hard, learn everything I could, and pursue every opportunity that came my way. Later, as I was working at Moore, I deliberately pursued cross-functional opportunities that presented themselves because I wanted to expand my knowledge, I wanted to expand my experience, I wanted to expand my value to the company. I worked, as an example, in accounting, in product management, in IT, in operations, marketing, and ultimately that led me up to a position in general management. And during that same time, I was recognizing the impact that computing power was having on businesses. So I went back to school in Chicago and I earned a master's in information systems, which again expanded my horizons more and opened more opportunities for me. I think interestingly, during that period of time, my wife and I and family, my very young family, moved every 2 years for
Mm,
about 10 years. So a lot of activity on that front as well. But it was important as part of my development, my understanding, and my history. After 17 years at Moore, which was a great tenure, I was recruited to a company called Pitney Bowes, which is a Fortune 500 company, where I was asked to run one of their major software divisions. So that was an interesting process to work at a very large company at a very senior level. Learned a lot there, enjoyed it immensely. And I think that's really important. You have to enjoy what you're doing, but you have to be learning. Otherwise, you stagnate, in my opinion. From Pitney Bowes, I was actually recruited into something called a .com. I think people don't really know what a .com is anymore, but it was a bubble. It was when the internet was first becoming very well known and very functional. They lured me away from a Fortune 500 company where I had an office, the size of an aircraft carrier, to a back office in New York City, where my desk was a coffee table. And that was a great experience. But what was really important about that is that it really introduced me to the world of private money managers. And by that, I mean hedge funds, private equity funds, venture funds. And that's really where I spent the balance of my career. And during the next 17 years or next 20 years, I guess, I served as a CEO of 4 different companies. I served on the board of directors of 8 different companies. I served as an operating partner for a private equity firm. So it was an interesting career after I actually started at .com. Currently, I'm a private investor, and I sit on the boards of companies where my primary role is to mentor young CEOs in growth businesses. So that's sort of a nutshell of where I've come from in my career and how I got there.
You mentioned Canisius High School and then Canisius College for 4 more years, and obviously those 2 institutions are Jesuit schools, and we pride ourselves on following in the teachings and the examples of Saint Ignatius, and the phrase that we use today, which wasn't as well fleshed out when you were a student, but certainly present in the daily curriculum and interactions with the Jesuit priests, is this idea of being formed in an Ignatian manner. Can you talk a little bit about how your Jesuit education has impacted you in your lifetime and in your career?
Sure. I think that I think the Ignatian principles is a pretty good one. Excuse me. And I think it's I interpret that as being service to life and service to others, using my time, talent, and treasure, which is how we used to talk about it back when I was a younger man. And early in my life, I worked to mainly fulfill responsibilities that make parish life work. I have a young family with the Catholic schools, and I served as a school board president of the local Catholic school. I coached 4 basketball teams and 4 soccer teams, along with my wife. She was always my helper. Sat on the parish council and fundraising. God, did I do a lot of fundraising, which is not my favorite thing. But new parishes and old parishes alike, they need money, and they always tap the young guys to go out and do that. So, I think that's really where I saw service early in my life. It linked very closely with my family activities. And something I think was relatively straightforward and easy to do. Met a lot of great people when I was doing it. Made lifelong friends. And have lived, quite frankly, in a number of parishes because of my relocation early on, and I've moved around quite a bit even in later life. Today, late in life, I really focus on a couple of things in terms of service. One is charitable giving. My family has been blessed, and I think a very real responsibility is to give back, not only your time and your talent, but also your treasure. And also, I continue to do service activities, and primarily in Catholic institutions. And one of my favorite things to do is to work at a parish food bank, as an example, where I am not the general. I am the foot soldier. I take no responsibility. I just want to work. I just want to help people when I can. So as I think about my life and about service to others, those are the activities that I've tried to engage in. And quite frankly, I'm looking for more. We have a local St. Vincent de Paul Society here that does a great job with people. So I'm thinking about maybe getting involved with them as well.
Oh, they'd be lucky to have you. As what a well thought out and well represented definition of being a man for others. I mean, it's so that phrase is kind of the motto of the Jesuit and Ignatian world, and to do that through every stage of your life. And I had to chuckle because I'm on my children's Catholic school board, and I'm planning the golf outing, and you do all of these different things because you want to lend yourself to those people, and it just made me chuckle a little bit because I find myself in the midst of that, and it's nice to see that the enjoyment that you got out of those things continue on through your adult life, and I'm sure there's a real appreciation for being just the guy who scoops the beans in the food line, and filling that role for this organization who needs someone to do that. There's an incredible satisfaction to that as well, and
Yes, there is.
and there's a huge focus on that. That's one of the things that I think sets Canisius apart in Western New York, especially is that focus on service, and COVID has created a little bit of an adjustment to what we're able to do within the community. But our campus ministry office has done a great job of adjusting within, the confines of distancing and things like that, to have our kids live that mission throughout the school year.
I'm glad you do that, and I think as they grow older, hopefully that becomes a lifelong mission of theirs, is to help others. It's very gratifying, particularly the more successful you become, the more you realize it's all a gift, and you need to share it.
You talk about you talk about your success, and you have you articulated very well kind of how you challenged yourself within the corporations and within your own personal education to kind of create a broad experience as an employee that allowed you to kind of move up to executive areas. Talk a little bit about what it's like to run companies from an executive level and a board level, and then help provide insight to some young alumni or students who want to choose that path for themselves.
Well, I think being CEO is the best job in the world, and one of the major advice I give to young people is you got to love what you do. Getting there is very hard. And not many can make it, but I think it's something certainly worth striving for, because if you don't make it as CEO, perhaps you end up as president or some other senior position, if that's what you want. It's not for the faint of heart. It takes sacrifice. You have to develop your career, and you have to be lucky. And an old mentor of mine used to say, "Yeah, Dennis, you have to be lucky, but you better work real hard at being lucky." And it's true. But you position yourself for when the opportunities arise that you can grab them, and I think that's critical. Secondly, it's all about being successful in what you do. In every assignment, you have to perform, and you have to, you quite frankly have to compete, and you have to be able to make sure that whatever job you're in, you've done it better than anybody else will, such that you're an obvious candidate for the next assignment. Once you make it to CEO, again, which is a great job, you know a lot, but you can't do it all. So you have to have confidence, and you have to make sure that people that work for you are extremely competent. And if not, you have to find those that can be. People say it's lonely at the top. I was never lonely. I think it's a matter of building relationships. It's a matter of managing those relationships and trusting your people to do good work. My job was, quite frankly, to give them guidance and to say these are the directions we should go in. Clearly, if we weren't performing, I had to deal with that, or if we wanted to change our direction strategically, those were my primary missions. But a CEO I worked for early on told me that he views his job more as a conductor of an orchestra than the lead trumpeter, and I think that was a good message for me. You've got to work through people to make the whole organization work. So I guess my message is that it's a great job. It's a different job than people think. I guess it can be autocratic, and I guess it can be tops down. The best CEOs I've known and I tried to emulate were those that tried to engage the team in ways that made everybody successful. From a board perspective, again, a lot of fun. Primarily when I've gone on boards, and I've been on a lot of them, I have a fiduciary responsibility, which is fundamental to make sure that the investors' investment is being protected, that the laws are being complied with. But I think the reason I go on a board is I look for CEOs that can benefit from the experience that I've had. And by the way, I've got some 40 quarters of 40 quarters on my back of results and having to respond and react to them. Probably more now as I think about it. So I've got a lot of experience, and I made a lot of mistakes, and I made a few good judgments in my time. And I try to help young CEOs that want it, because they've got to want it. Help them not to make the same mistakes, or at least if they're going to make them, to be aware of the fact that they're making them. Try to help them to understand, some of the bigger picture issues they should deal with. Help them to stop being the great functional leader they once were, and help them to become a CEO. And that's really where I like to spend my time. I think to a great extent it's worked. I can't tell you every CEO I've worked with would recommend me, mainly those that I had to fire. But I think that to a great extent, many of them would say it was helpful. And when I can help people, I feel pretty good, quite frankly, at this point in my life.
I think even the ones that maybe found themselves looking for a different career or different opportunity might reflect and think to themselves, that might have been what I needed at that time, right?
Probably not.
Well, we can hope. We can hope. As the seniors get ready to walk across the stage at 1180, and then in a week or two here for the class of 2021, young men, 50 years after you did very much the same thing. Do you want to offer just a little bit of advice to them as they look out onto the horizon of college and starting their adulthood?
Well, I spent some time, because of this call, reflecting upon what Canisius High School really taught me and helped me to incorporate into my life. And I think that the first thing I would encourage people to do is to think about that. But I just spend a moment and talk about some of the qualities that I recognize now, later in life, that were instilled into me. I think the first principle that I recognize now is there was an absolute challenge when I was in the high school to excel. The curriculum was difficult. The discipline, quite frankly, was difficult. But there was a clear understanding that all of us would do our best and that we would excel. And that was just simply the way it was. And we all understood that. And I think it really instilled a work ethic in us that was very important to go as a go forward basis. I think the second thing that I really learned, I didn't know it at the time, was the confidence to compete, which is very important when you're in business. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the smartest kid in the room. But what I did realize is that through my effort and really hard work, I was able to compete successfully with those people who were the smartest in the room. And that's something that's, as I think about it, served me very, very well. That was instilled in us at Canisius, because, we were all sort of the same in those classrooms, but you recognize the ones that were really bright, and you just couldn't let them beat you. I think another area is high expectations. It was understood clearly by the parents and the Jesuits and the teachers that 99.9% of us were going to go to college. And that's a very high expectation, but it was just what we thought would happen. But there's something else that happened to me personally, and that was, I associated with a lot of kids from families that were much more affluent than my family. And what that did is, and this is really important, it just instilled an expectation in me that I was going to achieve the same type of thing. And it was never a question. I assumed it. I liked what I saw. And, that was what I thought I would do. So that was really, really important, I think. And the last thing, and it's not the least thing, is my faith. The Jesuits, they loved us. They were tough on us, but they loved us. And all the religious activities around the high school really solidified my lifelong Catholicism. And that is really important if you go down the road of business, because what I can tell you is there's a lot of temptation in business. And, the priorities to a great extent are about making money. And if you don't have a good moral compass and, an ethical basis, you can go astray. And I found that, I'm not a perfect person. I wouldn't pretend to be. But I do think that the moral compass that was developed in high school has served me very, very well. as I've gone through my career. So those are sort of the attributes that I look back at and say, these were really important, as I went on. In terms of advice for young people that are thinking about going to a career in business, look, there's a lot of pathways into business and a lot of great opportunities. But I think if I were talking to a young person, I would say, look, as you come out of college, I would encourage you to work for a larger organization. It doesn't have to be a company, but it has to be a larger organization that has a lot of opportunities for you to learn. Because that's really important. When you start off, you may be bright, you may have a great degree, but when I say you're fodder for the cannons, right? You got to learn, and you got to contribute, and you got to rise. So I think that's important to recognize. Get to a bigger organization where you can learn. I think secondly, take some risks early on. You've got a long career. It's important to take risks. Maybe take that assignment that everybody else is shunning because it's bad or hard, and do a heck of a good job with it so that people recognize your ability to adapt to a situation and to perform in it. I think the third thing I would say is, look, seek cross-functional experience. Whenever you have an opportunity to do something different, take it. And by the way, if you don't see it, create the opportunity through your reputation and performance. If you do that, better opportunities, I promise you, will arise. I would suggest to people stay flexible. In my day, a lot of people wouldn't take those really oddball assignments. The company had a need. I'm a junior guy. The senior people didn't want the job for whatever reason. I'd raise my hand and say, I'll take that job. And that caused me to start to accelerate my rise through an organization. I also mentioned earlier that my family and I moved, back in that time, 10 times every 2 years. And we've moved more since then. But the point of that is I went with the jobs where I went where I was needed. And again, that helped me to accelerate and broaden my experience, but also to make me more valuable to the company. And I think maybe two other areas that I would encourage young people. One is you got to differentiate yourself from your peers in every step of your career. And you have to do that, quite frankly, through hard work and performance. And people will recognize that and see it. Your peers may not like it, or they may. Most of them won't, because most of them, quite frankly, I found many people do not want to work as hard as you do. And they don't differentiate themselves. They just don't perform as well. So it's a fact of life. It's competitive. I mentioned that a couple of times earlier. In business, if you want to get to the top, it's highly competitive. I think the last thing that I would suggest to a young person, and this is really, really important, is love what you do. There's an old hackneyed saying that says, if you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life. Well, I can tell you it's true. And if you don't like what you're doing, get out of it and go do something else. So long answer to your question, but on reflection, I think those are the qualities that I walked away from that were instilled in high school. And that's the advice I would offer to other young people as they go forward.
Dennis, I want to thank you for really that well thought out response, and for the detail in which you kind of provided roadmaps for these young men. And anyone who's watching this can certainly benefit and value the value of the information that you shared. And on behalf of the high school, congratulations again on celebrating your 50th anniversary, making it that far, but also having the perspective to look back and appreciate the time that you spent here, and to see the influences. The one thing that you said that resonated with me was just the Jesuits, and even though the expectations were exceptionally high, and they loved you and encouraged you through the whole thing. And I do think that that's a differentiator, for a Jesuit school. And although we don't have as many Jesuits as you did, or even when I did, the lay faculty and staff certainly have adopted that and passionately and entirely, towards the students of the high school now. So thank you so much for the time, and I really appreciate you spending some of your morning with us on a beautiful day.
Well, thanks for letting me pontificate. I appreciate it.
And anytime, you're welcome anytime.
Bye, Paul.